The rushing waters of the Snake River echoed through the canyon as Teresa Kincaid stared hopelessly at her broken wagon wheel. The late afternoon sun of 1876 casting long shadows across the Idaho territory. 3 days of traveling alone from Boise had left her exhausted, her provisions dwindling, and now this stranded at Eagle Creek Crossing with no means to continue her journey to Lewiston. Tears of frustration threatened to spill as she tugged futilely at her sodden skirts. The hem darkened from her failed attempt to examine the damage in the shallow part of the riverbed. "Appears you've got yourself in quite a predicament, madam," a deep voice called out. Teresa spun around, one hand flying to her throat in surprise. Atop a copper-colored stallion sat a broad-shouldered man, his face partially hidden beneath the brim of a well-worn hat. The stranger dismounted with practiced ease, boots crunching on the rocky shore as he approached. "I didn't hear you coming," she managed, suddenly conscious of her disheveled appearance and isolation. "Didn't mean to startle you." He removed his hat, revealing sun-weathered features and eyes the color of a cloudless summer sky. "Daniel Farrell," he introduced himself with a slight nod. "Folks call me Dan." "Teresa Kincaid," she replied cautiously, eyeing the rifle secured to his saddle. "I was crossing when the wheel just gave way." Daniel assessed the situation with a practiced eye, walking around the partially submerged wagon. "You're lucky you made it this far before it broke. Another few feet and you'd have been swept downstream." He looked at her thoughtfully. "Sometimes life brings unexpected gifts. Even a broken wheel can be a blessing if it breaks at the right moment. I fail to see the gift in being stranded miles from anywhere," Teresa responded, unable to keep the edge from her voice. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "The gift, Miss Kincaid, is that I happen to be passing by, and I know a thing or two about wagon wheels." Teresa watched as he rolled up his sleeves, revealing strong forearms as he waded into the shallow water. Something about his calm confidence made her tension ease slightly. Perhaps this wasn't the disaster it had seemed moments ago. "What brings a lady like yourself to travel alone through this country?" he asked, examining the damaged wheel. "Necessity, Mr. Farrell. My aunt in Lewiston is gravely ill. I received word 2 weeks ago and left as soon as I could arrange passage." She hesitated, then added, "She's the only family I have left." Daniel nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Lewiston's still a good 3 days' ride from here. This wheel won't make it." He straightened up, water dripping from his trousers. "My ranch is about 4 miles east. I've got spare parts there, tools too. We can get your wagon fixed by tomorrow." Teresa stiffened. "I couldn't possibly impose. It's no imposition. Can't leave a lady stranded, especially with night coming on." He glanced at the darkening sky. Mountain lions get mighty curious after sunset. The mention of predators made Teresa reconsider her reluctance. "I suppose I have little choice." "We always have choices, Miss Kincaid. Just some are wiser than others." He whistled, and his horse trotted over obediently. "We'll need to unload what we can, get your horse unhitched, and salvage what's important. I'll come back for the rest tomorrow." As they worked together to transfer her essential belongings to his horse, Teresa studied Daniel Farrell surreptitiously. Despite his rugged appearance, there was a gentleness in how he handled her possessions, taking special care with a small wooden box she identified as containing her mother's locket and letters. "You've been out here long?" she asked, securing a bundle to his saddle. 8 years. Came west after the war, looking for something different. Found this land and never looked back." He helped her mount his horse before climbing up behind her. "Hold on," he instructed, his voice close to her ear as he reached around her for the reins. Teresa tensed at the unexpected proximity, unaccustomed to such closeness with a man she'd just met. Yet there was something reassuring about his solid presence at her back as they set off, leading her horse behind them. The journey to Daniel's ranch took them through rolling hills covered in sagebrush and bunchgrass, the landscape bathed in the golden light of sunset. Despite her exhaustion, Teresa found herself noticing the beauty of this untamed country, so different from the crowded streets of Portland, where she'd spent the last 5 years working as a schoolteacher. "There it is," Daniel said eventually, nodding toward a collection of buildings nestled in a small valley. "Nothing fancy, but it's home." The main house was modest but well-built, constructed of hand-hewn logs with a stone chimney. Several outbuildings, a barn, bunkhouse, and what appeared to be a workshop completed the small settlement. A creek ran alongside the property, with a water-wheel turning lazily in the current. "It's lovely," Teresa said honestly, surprised by the evident care that had gone into the place. Daniel's arms tightened briefly around her. "Kind of you to say." As they approached, a dog came bounding out to greet them, followed by an older man with a pronounced limp. "Wondered where you'd got to," the man called out. He stopped short when he spotted Teresa. "Well now, didn't expect company. Hank, this is Miss Teresa Kincaid." Daniel introduced her as he helped her dismount. Her wagon broke down at Eagle Creek Crossing. "Miss Kincaid, this is Hank Wilson, my foreman and the closest thing to a conscience I've got." Hank touched the brim of his hat respectfully. "Madam." "Mr. Wilson," Teresa acknowledged with a nod. "Hank, would you mind seeing to the horses? Miss Kincaid needs some rest and a hot meal." "Course. Kitchen fire's still going." Hank took the reins, leading the horses toward the barn, the dog following at his heels. Daniel guided Teresa toward the house. "It's not much, but you'll be safe here tonight. Tomorrow we'll get your wagon fixed, and you can be on your way." The interior of the house was surprisingly comfortable, with solid furniture, bookshelves filled with volumes, and clean, if worn, rugs covering the plank floors. A fire burned in the stone hearth, casting a warm glow throughout the main room. "You have a lovely home, Mr. Farrell." "Thank you. Built most of it myself." He gestured to a rocking chair near the fire. "Please sit. I'll fix us something to eat." Teresa sank gratefully into the chair, her muscles aching from the day's tribulations. "I can help. Rest," he insisted firmly. "You've had a trying day." She watched as he moved efficiently around the kitchen area, setting a pot of coffee to boil and retrieving food from a pantry. There was something incongruous about this large, capable man performing such domestic tasks with evident ease. "You live here alone?" she asked, then immediately regretted the personal nature of the question. If Daniel found it improper, he didn't show it. "Just me and Hank. He stays in the bunkhouse most nights. Had a couple other hands, but they moved on last month. Ranching's a seasonal business out here." "What do you ranch?" "Cattle, mostly. Some horses, too." He sliced bread onto a plate. "I break and train them for the army and private buyers." As he prepared a simple but hearty meal of beans, bacon, and fresh bread, Teresa found herself relaxing despite the strange circumstances. There was something about Daniel Farrell that inspired trust, a steadiness that seemed rare in a land where most men were chasing fortunes or running from pasts. They ate at a rough-hewn table, the food simple but satisfying after her day of stress and minimal provisions. "Tell me about your aunt in Lewiston," Daniel prompted. "Aunt Martha raised me after my parents died of influenza when I was 12. Teresa traced the rim of her coffee cup. "She moved west 5 years ago when her husband passed, seeking a fresh start. I stayed in Portland to teach. We write regularly, but when her letter came saying she was ill, she swallowed hard. I had to come." Daniel nodded, understanding. "Family's important, not something to take for granted." "Do you have family, Mr. Farrell?" A shadow crossed his face. "Had a brother." Lost him at Gettysburg. I'm sorry. Long time ago now. He cleared his throat. My parents are still back in Pennsylvania. Write to them when I can. After the meal, Daniel showed Teresa to a small but clean bedroom. It's not much, but you'll be comfortable. It's more than adequate. Thank you for your kindness, Mr. Farrell. He paused at the doorway. Daniel, please. Out here, formalities seem out of place. Daniel, she repeated, finding she liked the sound of it. Then I'm Teresa. He nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Sleep well, Teresa. Tomorrow will get you back on your journey. After he left, Teresa sank onto the bed, the events of the day catching up with her. Outside her window, the vast Idaho wilderness stretched under a canopy of stars, more brilliant than she'd ever seen in Portland. In the distance, a coyote called, answered by another farther away. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her as she considered her situation. Daniel Farrell was a stranger, yet she felt safer in his home than she had during her entire journey thus far. There was something solid about him, reliable in a way that reminded her of her father. Yet different too, an intensity beneath his calm demeanor that stirred something unexpected within her. Teresa finally drifted to sleep with the unfamiliar sounds of the wilderness as her lullaby, her last conscious thought being that perhaps Daniel was right. Sometimes life's difficulties did bring unexpected gifts. Dawn broke clear and bright, sunlight streaming through the small window when Teresa awoke. For a moment, she was disoriented, then remembered the events of the previous day. She dressed quickly in her travel-worn clothes, lamenting that most of her belongings remained in her stranded wagon. The main room was empty when she emerged, but the scent of coffee and bacon hung in the air. A plate sat covered on the table with a folded note beside it. Gone to retrieve your wagon. Hank is in the workshop if you need anything. Help yourself to breakfast. D. Teresa ate the simple meal, appreciating Daniel's thoughtfulness. Afterward, curiosity led her to explore the main room more thoroughly in the morning light. The bookshelves held an eclectic collection of practical manuals on ranching and horse training alongside volumes of poetry, history, and several novels she recognized. A small desk in the corner held papers and what appeared to be sketches. Unable to resist, Teresa glanced at the top, drawing a remarkably skilled rendering of a wild horse in motion, capturing both power and grace. Below it were other sketches. Landscapes, wildlife, and one of a woman with a kind face that Teresa guessed might be Daniel's mother. She stepped away from the desk, feeling as though she'd intruded on something private. Instead, she carried her dishes to the washing basin and cleaned up after herself, then decided to find Hank, thinking perhaps she could make herself useful while waiting for Daniel's return. Outside, the ranch looked even more impressive in the morning light. The setting was breathtaking, with mountains rising in the distance and the creek sparkling in the sun. A small garden plot beside the house showed careful tending, with neat rows of vegetables emerging from the soil. Teresa followed the sound of hammering to the workshop, where she found Hank working on what appeared to be a replacement wheel. "Good morning, Mr. Wilson," she called from the doorway. Hank looked up, surprise evident on his weathered face. "Miss Kincaid, didn't hear you approach." He set down his tools and wiped his hands on a rag. "Dan's gone to fetch your wagon. Should be back midday." "Yes, I found his note. I was wondering if there's anything I might do to help while waiting." Hank studied her for a moment. "Not many ladies I know would be offering help in a situation like this. I'm not one to sit idle, Mr. Wilson, and it seems I'm already deeply in your and Mr. Farrell's debt." A smile creased his lined face. "Well now, don't know about that. Dan would say helping folks in need isn't about creating debts." He gestured to the wheel. "Got this nearly ready. Your original was beyond saving axle too. Good thing we had spares." "You're very kind. Both of you." Hank shrugged. This country's hard enough without people turning their backs on each other. He paused. If you're set on helping, there's bread that needs kneading in the kitchen. Dan started it before he left. Teresa returned to the house, finding the dough rising in a bowl as Hank had mentioned. She set to work kneading it with practiced movements, finding comfort in the familiar task. As her hands worked the dough, her mind wandered to Daniel. There was clearly more to the man than met the eye: the books, the drawings, the evident care he took in building his home. He wasn't just surviving in this wilderness. He was creating something meaningful. By midday, she had baked the bread and prepared a simple stew from ingredients she found in the pantry. The domestic activity helped settle her restlessness, giving her a sense of purpose while she waited. The sound of horses approaching brought her to the door just as Daniel rode into the yard, leading her horse and wagon. Relief flooded through her at the sight of her belongings intact. Daniel dismounted, his expression brightening when he saw her. "You're up and about. How did you sleep?" "Very well, thank you. I see you've rescued my wagon. Wheel and axle were worse than I thought. Had to bring the whole thing back." He gestured to where Hank was emerging from the workshop with the new wheel. "We'll have you rode ready by evening, but, she prompted when he hesitated. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, leaving it charmingly disheveled. "River's running higher today. Spring runoff from the mountains. Crossing will be dangerous for a day or two." Teresa's heart sank. "But my aunt—" "I understand your concern," he said gently. "I can ride to Lewiston tomorrow, bring back word of her condition. It's only a day's hard ride each way if I push it." "I couldn't ask you to do that." "You didn't ask. I offered." His blue eyes held hers steadily. 2 days here, resting and letting the river settle, won't make much difference. But trying to cross now could mean losing everything, including your life. Teresa recognized the wisdom in his words, though impatience gnawed at her. "You're very kind to a stranger, Mr. Farrell." "Daniel," he reminded her. "And you're not a stranger anymore, Teresa." Something in the way he said her name sent a curious warmth through her. "Besides," he added with a slight smile, "it's been a while since I've had such fine bread to look forward to." She found herself returning his smile. "You found that, did you? The whole house smells wonderful." He gestured toward the wagon. "Let's get your things inside so you can change and refresh yourself. Then perhaps you'd allow me to show you around the ranch? Might help pass the time." Together they unloaded her trunks and boxes, Daniel carrying them inside with ease. He left her alone to change, and Teresa gratefully donned a clean dress, taking time to brush and re-pin her hair. The simple act of freshening up improved her spirits considerably. When she emerged, Daniel was waiting on the porch, having changed his own dirt-streaked shirt for a clean one. "Much better," he observed with appreciation that made her cheeks warm. "Shall we?" The afternoon unfolded in an unexpected pattern of ease and discovery as Daniel showed Teresa around his ranch. He spoke with quiet pride of what he'd built, explaining how he'd arrived with little more than a dream and determination. "Land was cheap after the war," he explained as they walked along the creek. "No one wanted this particular plot too far from town, too many challenges. But I saw the water source, the natural shelter of the valley, and knew it could work. It must have been incredibly difficult at first. Nearly gave up that first winter," he admitted. "But come spring I started building one log at a time. Hank joined me the second year. He was passing through, broken in spirit after losing his wife and child to fever. Having purpose helped heal him, I think." Teresa watched a pair of hawks circling overhead. "And you? What were you healing from?" Daniel was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. "The war changed me," he finally said. "Saw things, did things, came back different. Couldn't settle back into normal life in Pennsylvania. Needed space, I suppose. Room to breathe and figure out who I was supposed to be now. And have you? Figured it out. His eyes met hers, surprisingly vulnerable. Getting closer every day. They continued walking, reaching a rise that overlooked the entire valley. Below them, the ranch buildings looked small against the vastness of the landscape. It's beautiful, Teresa murmured, taking in the panorama. Worth every hardship, Daniel agreed. He hesitated, then asked, "What about you, Teresa? What's your story?" She told him about her life in Portland, the small school where she taught, her dreams of someday having her own academy for girls. "Education for women is so important," she explained passionately. "I've saved nearly enough to lease a building, but finding support in the community has been challenging. People fear change," Daniel observed, "especially when it comes to women stepping beyond traditional roles." "You don't seem troubled by the idea," he shrugged. "Out here, everyone does what needs doing, regardless of whether it's men's work or women's work. Survival doesn't much care for such distinctions." They shared a smile of understanding before making their way back to the house as the afternoon light began to fade. Hank had finished installing the new wheel and axle and reported that the wagon was ready to travel whenever the river allowed. That evening, they shared another meal together, joined by Hank, whose gruff exterior had softened noticeably toward Teresa. The conversation flowed easily, ranging from local history to books they'd read to humorous tales of ranch life. "Never seen so many jackrabbits in my life," Hank recounted. "Whole field of them, eating our crops faster than we could plant them. Dan here came up with the idea of training the dog to herd them right out of the valley like sheep." Daniel laughed at the memory. "Worked too, at least until the dog decided rabbits made better dinner than sheep." Teresa found herself laughing more than she had in months, possibly years. There was something freeing about this place, these men who spoke to her as an equal and valued her thoughts and contributions. As darkness fell completely, Hank excused himself to the bunkhouse, leaving Daniel and Teresa alone by the fire. A comfortable silence settled between them as they sipped coffee. "Thank you," Teresa said eventually, "for everything. I dread to think what might have happened if you hadn't come along." Daniel studied the flames. "I don't usually take that route home. Something told me to ride by the crossing yesterday." He looked up, meeting her gaze. "I'm glad I did." The intensity in his eyes made her heart beat faster. Teresa looked away first, suddenly conscious of their solitude and the growing connection between them. "I should retire," she said, rising from her chair. "It's been a full day." Daniel stood as well, his tall frame illuminated by the firelight. "Of course. Rest well, Teresa." "Good night, Daniel." In the small bedroom, Teresa sat on the edge of the bed, her emotions in turmoil. She had come west with a singular purpose to reach her ailing aunt. Yet here she was, delayed but not distressed, finding unexpected comfort in the company of a man she'd known for barely a day. A man who stirred feelings she had long ago decided were not to be part of her life as an independent woman focused on her career. She touched the locket at her throat, containing miniature portraits of her parents. "What would you think of him?" she whispered, knowing they would have approved of Daniel's integrity and kindness, if not necessarily her growing attraction to him. Morning arrived with the disappointing news that the river had risen further overnight. "Spring thaws come early this year," Hank reported over breakfast. "Might be 3 days before it's safe to cross." Teresa's dismay must have shown on her face, for Daniel quickly added, "I'll ride to Lewiston today as I promised. Be back tomorrow with news of your aunt." "I hate to trouble you further." "No trouble," he interrupted gently. "I need to pick up supplies anyway." After breakfast, Daniel prepared for the journey, packing provisions and checking his horse's tack. Teresa followed him to the barn, watching as he worked with efficient movements. "Is there anything you'd like me to tell your aunt?" he asked as he secured his saddlebags. Teresa hesitated, then removed the locket from around her neck. "Could you give her this? Tell her I'm safe and will be there as soon as possible." Daniel accepted the locket carefully, tucking it into his shirt pocket. "I'll guard it with my life. It contains portraits of my parents. It's very precious to me." "I understand." His expression was solemn. "I'll deliver it personally." As he mounted his horse, Teresa impulsively reached up to touch his hand. "Be careful, Daniel." His fingers closed briefly around hers. "I will. Take care of the place while I'm gone." With a tip of his hat, he rode out, leaving Teresa watching until he disappeared from view. She turned to find Hank observing her with knowing eyes. "He's a good man," the older man said simply. "Best I've known." "Yes," Teresa agreed softly. "I believe he is." The day passed slowly, with Teresa helping Hank with various chores around the ranch. He taught her how to feed the chickens and collect eggs, showed her the vegetable garden he tended, and even allowed her to help groom the horses. "You're not what I expected," Hank commented as they worked side by side weeding the garden. "Oh? What did you expect? Most city women I've met wouldn't dirty their hands or brave the wilderness alone. Takes courage." Teresa smiled. "Necessity is a powerful motivator, Mr. Wilson." "Hank," he corrected. "Anyone who can bake bread like yours has earned the right to use my given name." By evening, Teresa had gained a new appreciation for the work involved in maintaining the ranch. Her muscles ached pleasantly from unaccustomed labor, and she felt a sense of accomplishment that teaching, for all its rewards, rarely provided. After dinner, Hank surprised her by producing a worn checkerboard. "Dan usually beats me soundly, but I keep trying. Care to play?" They spent a companionable evening by the fire, playing several games that Teresa managed to win more often than not. Hank proved to be a thoughtful conversationalist once his initial reserve had faded, sharing stories of his life before joining Daniel at the ranch. "Lost my Mary and little Samuel to scarlet fever in '68, he said, the pain still evident in his eyes despite the passage of years. "Wandered for nearly 2 years after, taking odd jobs, drinking too much. Found myself in a bad way in a worse town when Daniel stepped in. Some fellows were about to teach me a permanent lesson for a debt I couldn't pay. Daniel saved you? Paid my debt? Sobered me up? Offered me work." Hank moved a checker piece. "Didn't know me from Adam, but saw someone who needed help. That's just who he is." Teresa considered this new information. "He seems different from most men I've met. Or changed him, he says. Made him value different things." Hank studied her thoughtfully. "He likes you, you know. Haven't seen him this animated in years." Teresa felt her cheeks warm. "We've only just met. Sometimes that's all it takes." Hank captured one of her pieces. "My Mary and I knew after one dance at a county fair. Married 3 weeks later." "And were you happy?" Teresa asked softly. "Every day, even the hard ones." His weathered face softened with memory. "That's the thing about finding the right person, makes everything better, even the worst days." Teresa pondered his words as she prepared for bed later that night. She had always prided herself on her independence, building a life focused on her teaching career rather than pursuing marriage as most women did. Yet something about Daniel Farrell made her wonder if she had closed herself off to possibilities she shouldn't have dismissed so readily. Sleep came fitfully, her dreams filled with rushing rivers and Daniel riding away, always just out of reach. The next day dragged endlessly as Teresa waited for Daniel's return. She tried to keep busy, helping Hank with chores and even attempting to sketch the mountains visible from the property. Her artistic efforts paled in comparison to Daniel's drawings, but the activity helped pass the time. By late afternoon, anxiety began to gnaw at her. Shouldn't he have returned by now? Hank glanced at the sun's position. Still plenty of daylight left. Don't fret just yet. But as dusk approached with no sign of Daniel, even Hank began to show concern. River crossings between here and Lewiston can be tricky this time of year, he admitted. But Dan knows them all. He'll be back. They ate a quiet dinner, both straining to hear the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Teresa barely tasted the food, her mind conjuring increasingly worrisome scenarios. "I'll wait up," Hank said as they cleared the dishes. "You should rest." "I couldn't possibly sleep," Teresa objected. "I'll wait with you." They sat by the fire, conversation sporadic as both listened intently for any sound from outside. The mantel clock ticked loudly, marking the passage of hours until it was well past midnight. "Something's wrong," Teresa finally said, voicing the fear they both felt. "He should have been back by now." Hank's face was grave in the firelight. "First light, I'll ride out to look for him. No sense trying in the dark, too dangerous." "I'll come with you." "No," he said firmly. "You'll stay here. If he returns while I'm out searching, someone needs to be here." Teresa wanted to argue but recognized the logic in his words. "Very well, but promise you'll be careful." "Always am." Hank rose stiffly. "Try to get some rest. Morning comes early." But rest proved impossible. Teresa lay awake, listening to the night sounds of the wilderness and praying for Daniel's safe return. When the first pale light of dawn appeared at her window, she was already dressed and waiting. Hank appeared equally sleepless when she found him in the kitchen, preparing coffee and a hasty breakfast. "River's still high," he reported grimly after checking from the ridge. "But not impossible. I'll follow the main road to Lewiston, check all the crossings." Teresa helped him pack provisions and watched anxiously as he saddled his horse. "How long will you be gone?" "Depends on what I find. Could be back by nightfall, could be tomorrow." He hesitated. "If neither of us returns by the day after tomorrow, ride to the Hamilton place 2 miles west. Follow the creek. They'll help you." The gravity of his instructions made Teresa's stomach knot with fear. "Please find him, Hank." "I aim to." With a determined nod, he mounted and rode off, leaving Teresa alone at the ranch. The day stretched interminably as Teresa tried to maintain normal routines. She fed the animals, tended the garden, and prepared food that went largely uneaten. Every few minutes, she found herself pausing to listen, hoping for the sound of riders approaching. By late afternoon, dark clouds had gathered on the horizon, promising rain that would further complicate matters. Teresa paced the porch, watching the storm approach with growing dread. The first fat raindrops were just beginning to fall when she heard the unmistakable sound of a horse approaching at speed. Heart pounding, she peered through the gathering gloom, almost crying out with relief when she recognized Hank's horse. But he was alone and riding hard. "Hank!" she called, running to meet him as he dismounted. "Did you find him? Is he—" "He's alive," Hank interrupted, his expression grim. "But hurt. Horse threw him near Miller's Gorge. Legs broken, maybe ribs too. Got him to a line shack about 10 miles from here." "Oh God!" Teresa breathed. "We must get help, a doctor, no time. Storm's coming in fast, and he's losing blood. I came back for supplies." Hank was already striding toward the house. "Need bandages, whiskey, splints." Teresa followed, mind racing. "I'll gather everything. But how will you manage alone?" "Let me come with you." Hank paused, clearly weighing the risks. Trail's dangerous, especially in the rain, but having an extra pair of hands might make the difference. He nodded decisively. "Pack quickly. We leave in 10 minutes." Teresa rushed to her room, changing into her most practical clothes and gathering her warmest shawl. In the kitchen, she filled a bag with bandages torn from clean sheets, herbs she'd noticed in the pantry, and the bottle of whiskey Hank had indicated. Outside, the rain was falling steadily as Hank prepared 2 horses. "Can you ride astride?" he asked bluntly. "Yes." At his raised eyebrow, she added, "My father believed daughters should learn the same skills as sons." "Good man, your father." Hank helped her mount, then handed her a slicker to ward off the rain. "Stay close behind me. Trail gets narrow in places." They set off at a fast pace, the rain intensifying as they rode. Teresa clung to her horse's mane, squinting against the downpour as they followed a barely visible trail into the foothills. Lightning flashed occasionally, illuminating the rugged landscape in stark relief. The journey was a blur of discomfort and fear, with Hank setting a punishing pace despite the treacherous conditions. Teresa's muscles screamed in protest, but she gritted her teeth and kept up, driven by concern for Daniel. Nearly 2 hours later, Hank finally slowed as they approached a small, crude structure nestled among pine trees. "Line shack," he called over his shoulder. "Used during roundups." They dismounted, hurrying inside with their supplies. The single room was dimly lit by a small fire in a stone hearth. On a narrow cot lay Daniel, his face pale in the flickering light. "Daniel!" Teresa rushed to his side, heart constricting at the sight of him. His right leg was crudely splinted, and blood had soaked through a makeshift bandage on his head. His eyes fluttered open at her voice. "Teresa," he murmured, confusion evident. "You shouldn't be here." "Hush now." She touched his forehead, alarmed at the heat radiating from his skin. "We've brought supplies. We're going to help you." While Hank tended the fire and heated water, Teresa carefully cleaned the gash on Daniel's head, her hands gentle despite their trembling. His eyes followed her movements, though they seemed unfocused at times. "Your aunt," he said suddenly, wincing as she applied pressure to stop the bleeding. "Found her. She's better, recovering. Sent a letter with the doctor." Relief flooded through Teresa. "Thank you for going. But you shouldn't have tried to return in such conditions." "Promised you," he murmured. "Locket's safe too. Inside pocket." Teresa blinked back tears at his dedication. "That doesn't matter now. What matters is getting you well." Together with Hank, she rebandaged Daniel's wounds, splinted his leg properly, and managed to get him to swallow some whiskey mixed with willow bark tea for the pain and fever. Outside, the storm raged on, making any thought of moving him impossible. "We'll stay here tonight," Hank decided. "See if the fever breaks. If he's stronger tomorrow and the rain lets up, we can try to get him back to the ranch." Teresa nodded agreement, settling herself on the floor beside Daniel's cot. "I'll watch him first. You need rest too, Hank." The older man didn't argue, stretching out on a bedroll near the fire with a weary sigh. "Wake me in a few hours." As the night deepened, Teresa maintained her vigil, periodically bathing Daniel's face with cool water and adjusting his coverings when he shivered with chills. His fever seemed to worsen despite their efforts, and he drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes speaking clearly, other times mumbling incoherently. During one lucid moment, his hand found hers in the darkness. "I'm glad you're here," he whispered. "Shouldn't be, but I am." Teresa squeezed his fingers gently. "So am I. Thought of you, while I was lying here before Hank found me. Thought I might die without seeing you again." His voice was weak but determined. "Would have been my greatest regret." "Don't talk like that," she admonished softly. "You're going to be fine." A ghost of his usual smile appeared. "Yes, madam." His eyes drifted closed again, hand still clasping hers. Teresa watched him sleep, her heart fuller and more frightened than it had ever been. In just 3 days, this man had become important to her in ways she couldn't fully comprehend. The thought of losing him now was unbearable. She must have dozed despite her intentions, for she woke to find gray dawn light filtering through the cabin's single window. Hank was already up, checking Daniel's condition. "Fever's down some," he reported quietly. "Rain's stopped too. If he can manage the journey, we should try to get him home." Daniel was awake, looking exhausted but more alert than the night before. "I can ride," he insisted, though his pallor suggested otherwise. "Not alone you can't," Hank countered. "You'll ride with me. Miss Kincaid can follow with the other horse." Getting Daniel onto Hank's horse was an ordeal that left him gray-faced and sweating, but he clenched his jaw and endured without complaint. Teresa mounted the second horse, and they set off slowly toward the ranch. The journey back took twice as long as their outward trip, with frequent stops when Daniel's pain became too intense to continue. Teresa watched him anxiously, admiring his stoicism even as she worried about the toll the journey was taking. By the time the ranch came into view in the late afternoon, Daniel was barely conscious, slumped against Hank's supporting arm. Teresa rode ahead to prepare the house, quickly stoking the fire and turning down Daniel's bed. Together, she and Hank managed to get Daniel inside and settled. His leg needed more attention, the splint having shifted during the difficult ride. While Hank went to tend the horses, Teresa carefully removed Daniel's boot and cut away his pant leg to expose the injury. The break was clearly visible, the leg swollen and discolored. Teresa swallowed hard, drawing on half-remembered instructions from a doctor she'd once boarded with in Portland. "This will hurt," she warned Daniel, who had regained consciousness enough to watch her warily. "Do what you must," he replied, bracing himself. With steady hands belying her inner turmoil, Teresa manipulated the broken bone back into alignment. Daniel's sharp intake of breath was the only indication of his pain, though sweat beaded on his forehead. "You have surgeon's hands," he managed once the worst was over and she was securing a proper splint. "Hardly. But I once had a physician as a boarder. He believed everyone should know basic medical care." She worked as she talked, keeping her voice calm to distract them both. "He was quite progressive, allowed me to assist with simple procedures, and taught me about setting bones and treating fevers." "Lucky coincidence," Daniel murmured, exhaustion evident in his voice. "Not coincidence," Teresa corrected softly. "Providence, perhaps." By evening, Daniel was resting more comfortably, the fever reduced and the worst of the pain managed with willow bark tea and careful positioning. Hank, satisfied that his friend was in good hands, retired to the bunkhouse, leaving Teresa to maintain her watch. She sat beside Daniel's bed, sewing by lamplight as she listened to his steady breathing. Outside, the world had settled into the deep quiet that follows a storm, with only occasional drips from the eaves breaking the silence. "You're still here," Daniel observed sometime later, his voice startling her from a light doze. "Of course I am." She set aside her sewing. "How are you feeling?" "Like I lost an argument with a mountain." He shifted, wincing. "But better than before." "Thank you, Teresa. I've done nothing anyone else wouldn't have done." "We both know that's not true." His eyes, clear now despite his weakness, held hers. "Most people wouldn't have ridden through a storm for a man they barely know." Teresa felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Perhaps I know you better than you think." A smile tugged at his mouth. "Perhaps you do." In the days that followed, Daniel made steady progress toward recovery. The fever disappeared completely, and though his leg would require weeks to heal, his strength returned rapidly. Teresa remained at the ranch, postponing her journey to Lewiston after receiving confirmation via a passing traveler that her aunt was indeed recovering well from her illness. She fell into the rhythms of ranch life with surprising ease, helping Hank with cooking and gardening, reading to Daniel during his enforced rest, and even learning to manage some of the livestock under Hank's patient tutelage. "You're a natural," Hank commented one morning as they returned from feeding the horses. "Most city folks never take to country living." "I'm finding I enjoy it more than I expected," Teresa admitted. "There's something satisfying about the work, seeing direct results of your efforts. Different from teaching, I imagine." "Very, though both have their rewards." She paused, looking out over the valley. "It's beautiful here. I can see why Daniel loves it so much." Hank gave her a knowing look but merely nodded agreement. As Daniel's mobility improved, first with crutches and later with a walking stick, he and Teresa spent increasing amounts of time together. He showed her his drawings, shared books from his collection, and told her stories of his early days building the ranch. Teresa, in turn, spoke of her dreams for a girls' academy, her years of teaching, and memories of her childhood with parents who had encouraged her independence in an era when such thinking was unusual. "They sound like remarkable people," Daniel said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "You were fortunate to have them, even if for too brief a time." Yes, they believed education was equally important for daughters and sons. She smiled at the memory. "My father taught me to ride, fish, and even shoot, much to the horror of our neighbors." "And your mother approved of this?" "She insisted on it. Said a woman should never be helpless or dependent if it could be avoided." Teresa's smile faded. After they died, Aunt Martha continued their approach, though it made finding a teaching position challenging. "Many schools want docile women who will teach girls to be proper ladies, not independent thinkers." Daniel nodded understanding. "The world fears change, especially when it comes to upsetting established order. But the frontier's different necessity often overcomes convention. I've noticed." Teresa gestured toward the ranch. "Here, everyone does what needs doing. There's less concern for whether it's proper. One of the things I love about this life." Daniel shifted to face her more directly. "Teresa, have you given thought to what you'll do once you've visited your aunt?" The question caught her off guard, though it had been increasingly on her mind. "I should return to Portland. The new school term begins in September, and I've already delayed longer than intended." "Of course." Something in his expression closed off. "You have responsibilities there." An awkward silence fell between them, filled with unspoken thoughts. Teresa found herself reluctant to pursue the topic further, afraid of what she might reveal or what Daniel might not say. The next morning, Hank announced that the river had finally returned to normal levels, making the crossing to Lewiston safe again. "If you still aim to visit your aunt, Miss Kincaid, now would be the time," he said over breakfast. "I can escort you as far as the town if you'd like." Teresa glanced at Daniel, who was focusing intently on his coffee. "Yes, I suppose I should go. I've delayed far too long already." Daniel looked up then, his expression carefully neutral. "Of course, your aunt will be wondering about you." Preparations were made for Teresa's departure the following day. Her wagon was checked one final time, provisions packed, and her belongings gathered from the small room that had become hers over the past weeks. That evening, Daniel asked if she would walk with him to the ridge overlooking the property. Though his movements were still hampered by his healing leg, he insisted he felt strong enough for the short journey. They walked in companionable silence, the setting sun painting the landscape in gold and amber. At the top of the ridge, Daniel paused, leaning on his walking stick as he gazed out over his land. "I came here with nothing but dreams and determination," he said eventually. "Built something from nothing. It's been a good life, mostly." He turned to face her, but lonely at times. Teresa's heart quickened at the vulnerability in his admission. "It's a beautiful place, Daniel. You've created something remarkable here, Could be more with the right person to share it. His eyes met hers, intent and serious. These past weeks, having you here, it's shown me what's been missing. Teresa felt her carefully constructed resolve begin to waver. Daniel, I know you have your school, your plans in Portland, he continued quickly. I'm not asking you to abandon those dreams, but I hoped that perhaps you might consider new possibilities. Here. Are you asking me to stay? Her voice was barely above a whisper. I'm asking you to consider it, to consider us. He took a step closer. I know it's sudden. We've only known each other a short time, but I believe what's grown between us is real and rare. Teresa's mind raced with conflicting emotions, the pull of her established life and career in Portland against the unexpected happiness she'd found here with Daniel. I need to see my aunt, she said finally. I've come all this way, and I must fulfill that obligation. But after that, she took a deep breath. After that, I would like very much to return, to explore what this might become. The joy that transformed Daniel's face made her breath catch. You'll come back. Yes. The certainty in her voice surprised even her. I can't promise what decisions I'll make ultimately, but I want to give us a fair chance. Daniel reached for her hand, his fingers warm and strong around hers. That's all I ask. As twilight deepened around them, he drew her closer. May I kiss you, Teresa Kincaid? Her answer was to rise on tiptoes, meeting him halfway as his lips found hers in a gentle, questioning kiss that quickly deepened into something more certain. When they finally parted, Teresa remained in the circle of his arms, feeling as though something fundamental had shifted in her world. I've never believed in swift courtships, she admitted. Always thought love should develop slowly, carefully. Daniel smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. Sometimes life brings unexpected gifts. The wise person recognizes them, even when they arrive in surprising packages. Teresa remembered his words from their first meeting at the river crossing and marveled at how prophetic they had proven. Like a broken wagon wheel? Exactly like that. He kissed her again, briefly but tenderly. Come. It's getting dark, and you have a journey to prepare for. The following morning brought a bittersweet parting as Teresa prepared to leave for Lewiston. Daniel insisted on accompanying her to the river crossing despite Hank's objections about his still healing leg. I'll be careful, he promised, mounting his horse with only slight difficulty. Besides, I'm not letting Teresa cross that river alone after what happened last time. The journey to Eagle Creek Crossing was made in companionable conversation, with Daniel pointing out landmarks and sharing stories of the area's history. When they reached the river, Teresa felt a strange sense of completing a circle as she looked at the spot where they had first met. It looks much more peaceful now, she observed as they prepared to ford the water. Nature cycles, Daniel replied. Calm follows storm, always. The crossing was accomplished without incident, and they continued toward Lewiston, reaching the outskirts of the town by mid-afternoon. Daniel guided her to a modest house on a quiet street. Your aunt's place, he explained. I found it when I came looking for news of her. Teresa felt a sudden nervousness. Will you come in with me? Of course, if you want me to. Martha Kincaid proved to be a sprightly woman in her 60s, her illness having left her thinner but still vibrant. Her joy at seeing Teresa was exceeded only by her curiosity about the tall, handsome man accompanying her niece. So you're the cowboy who found my Teresa stranded, she said after introductions and explanations had been made. And now you're courting her, if I understand correctly? Daniel smiled at the older woman's directness. With your blessing, I hope to be Mrs. Kincaid. Martha, please. She studied him with shrewd eyes. My niece is a woman of exceptional mind and spirit. She deserves a man who values those qualities. I assure you I do. Very much. Martha nodded, apparently satisfied. Then you have my blessing, for what it's worth. Teresa has always known her own mind. They stayed for dinner, with Martha insisting Daniel tell the full story of their meeting and subsequent adventures. By the time they rose to leave Daniel to the hotel in town, Teresa to stay with her Aunt Martha had clearly warmed to the rancher. "I like him," she declared after he had gone, leaving the women alone. "He looks at you the way your uncle looked at me, like you hang the moon and stars." Teresa felt her cheeks warm. "It's all happened so quickly. Sometimes I can hardly believe it myself." "The heart knows what it wants," Martha said simply. "And timing isn't always what we expect." She patted Teresa's hand. "Now, tell me what you're thinking of doing about your teaching position." Over the next few days, Teresa spent time reconnecting with her aunt, assisting with her continued recovery, and exploring Lewiston. Daniel visited daily, sometimes joining them for meals, other times taking Teresa for walks or drives around the area. "Lewiston's growing," he observed as they walked along the main street one afternoon. "New businesses opening every month. They'll be needing a good school before long." Teresa glanced at him, understanding the implication. "Are you suggesting I could establish my academy here instead of Portland?" "It's closer to the ranch," he acknowledged with a smile. "But only if it's what you want. Your dreams matter to me, Teresa." The sincerity in his words touched her deeply. Unlike many men who might have simply expected her to abandon her career for marriage, Daniel was actively seeking ways to help her fulfill her ambitions. That evening, as they sat on her aunt's porch watching fireflies dance in the gathering dusk, Teresa made her decision. "I've been thinking about your suggestion," she began, "about establishing a school here instead of returning to Portland." Daniel turned to her, careful not to show too much eagerness. "And I believe it could work. Lewiston is growing, as you said. There would be challenges, of course, but—" She took a deep breath. "But I would be closer to you, to us." The smile that lit his face made her heart skip. "Are you saying you'll stay?" "I'm saying I want to try to build something here, both professionally and personally." Daniel took her hands in his. "Teresa Kincaid, I know we've known each other only a short time, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" Though she had begun to anticipate such a proposal, the reality of it still took her breath away. "Are you certain? Your life would change considerably with a wife who intends to establish a school." "I've never been more certain of anything," he replied without hesitation. "Your dreams are part of who you are, and who you are is exactly who I want to share my life with." Teresa felt tears welling in her eyes. "Then yes, Daniel Farrell, I will marry you." Their wedding took place 6 weeks later on a perfect early autumn day. The ceremony was held at Daniel's ranch, now their ranch, under an arch of wildflowers with the mountains as backdrop. Martha was there, fully recovered and beaming with approval, as was Hank, standing proudly as Daniel's best man. News of the schoolteacher marrying the rancher had spread through the territory, bringing a surprising number of well-wishers to the celebration. Many of Lewiston's prominent families attended, several expressing interest in Teresa's plans for a school. "You've already got yourself a waiting list of students," Martha observed during the wedding feast. Not a bad start to married life. The evening ended with music and dancing under the stars, with Daniel leading Teresa in a waltz despite his still healing leg. "Happy?" he asked as they swayed together. "Completely," she assured him, resting her head against his chest. "Though I still marvel at how quickly life can change. 3 months ago, I never would have imagined this." "Sometimes life brings unexpected gifts," Daniel murmured, repeating the words that had become something of a private motto between them. "All we can do is be grateful and make the most of them." As summer faded into autumn and then winter, Teresa and Daniel settled into married life with surprising ease. Their days fell into comfortable rhythms, with each supporting the other's work. Daniel helping Teresa prepare the building she had leased in Lewiston for her school, Teresa assisting with ranch accounts and correspondence. The Farrell Academy for Girls opened its doors in January 1877 with 15 students ranging in age from 6 to 16. Teresa's progressive curriculum, emphasizing not just traditional subjects but also practical skills and even basic sciences, initially raised eyebrows but soon earned praise as the girls thrived under her guidance. Daniel, true to his word, supported her career wholeheartedly, even building bookshelves for the schoolroom and occasionally giving demonstrations on horsemanship and nature studies. Their arrangement with Teresa spending weekdays in town and weekends at the ranch became less unusual as Lewiston citizens grew accustomed to the unconventional couple. By spring, Teresa had news of her own to share. On a perfect April evening, with wildflowers carpeting the hills around their home, she told Daniel they would be welcoming a child in late autumn. His joy was boundless, lifting her into a careful embrace as he whispered promises of love and protection for both her and their unborn child. They agreed that the academy would continue, with Teresa training an assistant to help during her confinement and eventual return. Thomas Farrell was born on a snowy November night in 1877, with Martha Kincaid and Hank Wilson pacing anxiously outside the bedroom door while Daniel remained steadfastly by Teresa's side throughout her labor. "He's perfect," Daniel whispered, cradling his son with awe as tears streamed unashamedly down his face. "Thank you for this gift, my love." Life adjusted again to accommodate their growing family. Teresa continued teaching, sometimes with young Thomas in a basket beside her desk, setting a powerful example for her female students about balancing family and professional responsibilities. The years brought more children: Elizabeth in 1879 and twins James and William in 1882, along with expansion of both the ranch and the academy. Daniel's skill with horses earned him contracts with the Army, while Teresa's school gained such reputation that families from as far as Boise sent their daughters to study under her guidance. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Daniel surprised Teresa with a gift that brought her to tears: a proper school building of her own, constructed on land adjacent to their expanded ranch property. "Now you can truly combine both worlds," he explained as he showed her the spacious classrooms and living quarters. "No more dividing your time between town and home." The Farrell Academy flourished in its new location, eventually accepting boarding students and expanding to include boys as well as girls. Teresa's educational philosophy, emphasizing critical thinking, practical knowledge, and character development, produced graduates who went on to colleges back east or successful careers throughout the Northwest. Through it all, Daniel and Teresa's partnership remained strong, weathering the inevitable challenges of frontier life with the same determination and mutual support that had characterized their relationship from the beginning. On a warm summer evening nearly 20 years after their first meeting, they sat together on the porch of their home, watching their children and grandchildren play in the yard as the sun set behind the mountains. "Do you ever regret it?" Daniel asked, his hand finding hers as it had countless times over their years together. "Staying here instead of returning to Portland?" Teresa smiled, the years having added character to her still beautiful face. "Not for a moment. This life, our life, has been richer and more fulfilling than anything I could have imagined that day at the river crossing." "Sometimes life brings unexpected gifts," Daniel murmured, leaning over to kiss her gently. "And sometimes," Teresa replied, resting her head against his shoulder, "those gifts last a lifetime." As darkness settled over the valley they both loved, stars appearing one by one in the vast Idaho sky, Teresa reflected on the journey that had brought them here. A broken wagon wheel, a chance encounter, a leap of faith, all had combined to create a life neither of them could have anticipated, but both had embraced with whole hearts. It had not always been easy. There had been hardships: harsh winters, economic downturns, illnesses, and occasional conflicts with neighbors or townspeople who found their ideas too progressive. Yet through it all, they had faced each challenge together, emerging stronger for the trials they weathered. Their children had grown strong and independent, each combining Teresa's intellectual curiosity with Daniel's practical abilities in different measures. Thomas, now 20, was studying engineering at a university in California, planning to bring new irrigation techniques back to the ranch. Elizabeth, 18 and fiercely intelligent, was preparing to follow in her mother's footsteps as an educator. The 16-year-old twins, James and William, showed Daniel's affinity for horses and land management, already taking on significant responsibilities at the ranch. "We did well, didn't we?" Daniel mused, watching their family with evident pride. "Built something that matters." "We did," Teresa agreed. "Something neither of us could have created alone." As moonlight silvered the landscape they had both come to love, Teresa thought about how a single moment, a broken wheel, a river too high to cross, had altered the entire course of her life. Had she successfully forded Eagle Creek that day, she would never have met Daniel, never discovered this life that had proven so unexpectedly fulfilling. "I was thinking," Daniel said, interrupting her reflections, "about expanding the school program next year, adding more practical sciences, maybe some agricultural studies." Even after all these years, his continued interest in her work warmed her heart. "That sounds wonderful. I've been considering approaching the state education board about our curriculum. It might serve as a model for other rural schools." They continued discussing plans and possibilities as the evening deepened, their conversation flowing easily between family matters, ranch business, and educational theories. This seamless integration of their separate interests into a shared vision had been the hallmark of their partnership from the beginning. Later, as they prepared for bed in the comfortable home that had expanded along with their family over the years, Teresa found herself pausing before the small wooden box Daniel had so carefully handled during their first meeting. Inside lay her mother's locket, now accompanied by other treasures: a pressed wildflower from their wedding day, locks of their children's hair, the first letter Daniel had written her during a brief separation. "Remembering?" Daniel asked softly, coming to stand behind her. "Thinking about journeys, how we never really know where they'll lead when we set out." She leaned back against him, feeling the solid strength that had been her anchor through 2 decades. "I was so focused on reaching Lewiston, seeing my aunt. I never imagined the river would have other plans." Daniel's arms encircled her waist. "Life rarely follows the paths we expect." Thankfully, she turned in his embrace to face him. "I love you, Daniel Farrell, more today than I did 20 years ago, which I wouldn't have thought possible then. And I love you, Teresa Farrell, more with each passing day." As moonlight streamed through their bedroom window, they embraced, two people who had found in each other not just love, but partnership, respect, and the courage to build a shared dream in the wilderness. The broken wheel that had once seemed a disaster had indeed brought an unexpected gift, a lifetime of love and purpose, richer and more fulfilling than either could have imagined on that fateful day at Eagle Creek Crossing.